Hello and welcome to another of our very special question and answer sessions, which today has international feel to it. My name is Steve and I'm joined by two of our keepers here at Longleat, and also our special guest for today comes all the way from Adelaide in South Australia. So without further ado, I'm going to get you each to introduce yourselves one by one, and then we'll chat a bit more about why things are going to be Australian based today.
Hello, my name is James Dennis and I am a very lucky person. I am a koala keeper at Longleat.
Me next then. My name's Graeme. I head up the Animal Venture team, and like James, I help work with koalas and been very fortunate to work with the team in South Australia as well.
Hello, my name's Chris Daniels. I'm a Professor of Zoology at Adelaide University and University of South Australia, and I'm lucky enough to be the CEO of Koala Life and spend my time with wild and captive koalas.
Thank you very much, guys, and thank you again for joining our call today. So I'm going to begin the question and answer session here. Actually, Graeme, I think I'm going to ask you the very first question, and that's just firstly, why have we got koalas at Longleat? Give us the background.
Yeah, it's a question we get asked a lot, actually. Why would we have such sensitive little creatures from the other side of the world? And do you know what? If you can't look at a koala and think they're absolutely incredible, then you're not looking at them properly. They are hugely unique. They are well, they're really in a state of needing our help at the moment. And also we get to work with some amazing partners out in Australia as well. So for us, they're a real conservation species that not only look after the koala species in general, but actually the eucalyptus forest they live in, the habitat they live in. They're a nice key species for us to work with. And they're just absolutely fabulous little creatures that eat the best smelling food, that poop the best smelling poo, and you know that they're brilliant to work with, and have a real lovely conservation story to match as well.
Right, so the next question I'm going to ask you, Chris, and that's, of course, we've got koalas at Longleat, as Graeme just said, but what made you kind of interested in Longleat, and why the international partnership with Longleat?
So koalas are really becoming an international symbol of all that is great about nature and all that is challenging for nature. So koalas are really up there in the top three with pandas and tigers as the most loved animals on Earth. But as Graeme was just saying, there's a lot of challenges there. So we look for international partners to help tell our story. We love Longleat because they're deeply engaged with Australia and its wildlife. So are the people from the United Kingdom, and they've always had a really strong interest in animals, koalas included. So they're a natural partner in that way. Koalas are difficult to maintain, they're tricky, so they need careful investment, deep and long-term engagement, and Longleat provide that. But of course, the major reason is that Longleat's the only place on Earth outside of Australia that doesn't call them koala bears. So once they did that, they were our friends.
Thank you, Chris. Right, James, I'm going to come on to you next. Being the day-to-day keeper of the koalas, I'd like you just to talk a bit about who are the koalas we've got at Longleat. Tell us a bit more about their personalities.
Yeah, so it's probably the most asked question I've had to answer since having the koalas arrive. I'm very biased. I would say I've definitely got the four best koalas in the world. And that is our elderly koala, our newest, I guess you could argue, the Japanese superstar, that is Burke. He's our elder resident, only just turned 15, and yeah, he's a grumpy old man. He just does what he wants. So he's great. And we've got the two girls, Violet and Maisie, both little superstars in themselves. And then you finally got Dennis, who's the soon up and coming prince, who's running the roost here at Longleat.
And I suppose a question that, James, coming back to you, a question that probably lots of people would ask is, how do they cope with the British climate and weather, the rain, and especially at the winter now, our koalas at Longleat? Because isn't it normally quite hot in Australia and South Australia?
Yeah, well, I think you can see from Chris's video that it's nice and sunny where he is. Definitely not here. Our koalas are very much putting up with the cold, the rain, and the colder temperatures. Thankfully, southern koalas are very much built for that. And Violet, one of our female koalas, generally epitomizes that. She's outside most of the time. She's been outside in every bad weather you can imagine. She loves it. She almost sunbathes in the rain. So she's a bit of an unusual in appearance koala, but it's very normal for them.
And Chris, I guess the habitats and the climates in South Australia, they're quite variable around the year as well. Some would say a bit comparable with the UK.
Yes, we have to remember that Australia is a continent, and it's obviously famous for its heat. It's currently 38 degrees Celsius here today, blue skies, wonderful sun, magnificent summer. But our koalas are southern koalas, so they were found in Victoria and southeast and South Australia, which is very cold in the winter as well. And in fact, large areas of their habitat receive snow in the winter time. These animals have very thick fur. They're quite a large animal, so they're capable of withstanding the extremes of both the heat and the cold. So they're doing very well here today, 38 degrees, but they also do very well in snow and rain, as James was saying.
Chris, koalas are an iconic species in Australia and indeed around the world. But what makes koalas so special? And then also, why are they at risk? What's the dangers they kind of face?
Yeah, koalas have become one of the iconic animals of the world, and they represent so much about what is good with nature. And that's because of their physical appearance. I mean, you look at one of these things, it's just about the cutest animal on earth. I think it beats the daylights out of pandas and all sorts of other things. So they capture people's attention, but they're also really vulnerable. So as a tree-dwelling, forest-dwelling animal, they are very vulnerable to bushfires. They're also very vulnerable to habitat clearance and to other challenges, attacks by predators such as dogs, of course, cars when they come down and so forth. So their lifestyle represents a real challenge to how we respond to nature. And so they become emblematic about that, and how we as a community look after nature whilst also managing agriculture, managing urban growth and those sorts of things. So we have a very close relationship with koalas that also breeds that connection with nature. So koalas fulfill a whole range of really important roles with us as a community. And of course, being a large browser, they have significant impacts on the forests themselves as well. So they play a really important ecological role. So there are many reasons why koalas are incredibly important for Australian ecosystems.
Thank you, Chris. Graeme, can you talk to me about some of the kind of the real threats that we're aware of, and having worked with koalas, that faces koalas in the wild, but also in captivity as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really nice is to look at koalas, as Chris says, they're a real flagship key species, but they live in the eucalyptus forests. So they not only face pressures from areas of deforestation, but also overbrowsing as well. So when the populations of koalas boom in certain areas because there's lots of plentiful food supply, they then tend to eat themselves out of a home. We saw the bushfires earlier last year and again this year. In fact, every year there are fires that appear. Koalas tend not to move great distances, so they tend to huddle in sort of regional areas, and then when fires go through, it affects them quite severely. But one of the bigger threats to koalas, both the northerns and the southerns, is the diseases that they face. So we're faced with conditions such as chlamydia, various cancers, retroviruses, but also for the southern koalas particularly, a horrible disease called oxalate nephrosis, which for anyone that's followed the koalas at Longleat, we lost a couple of koalas through oxalate nephrosis. It is a kidney disease. It basically causes crystallizations in the kidneys and stops them functioning normally. And although koalas are not a species that drink a lot, in fact, the word koala means no drink, we tend to spot it with our koalas when they start drinking a lot. And that tells us that their kidneys are going through some issues. And it is a Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's about 60% of koalas are affected by it in the wild as well as in captivity as well. So for the southern population particularly, it's one of our real focuses, and it's one of the big problems in the southern species in general.
Chris, I'm going to come back to you with the next question. In that you've been one of the main people responsible for setting up organisation and charitable organisation in Australia. Do you want to just talk to us, introduce what exactly that is and how the partnership with Longleat plays an important role in that?
Yeah, so Graeme has made some really important points about the challenges that koalas face, both with the loss of habitat and therefore their restriction across their range, and of course their health status. And they are very susceptible to a range of infective diseases such as chlamydia and koala retrovirus. They do have a very narrow gene pool generally, and the ones in South Australia, it's very focused, exposing them to genetic conditions such as oxalate nephrosis, which Graeme just described. So there's all of these health challenges. So we have roles and issues about how to understand koalas in their habitat, about the health and well-being of koalas, and as we've already discussed, so much about koalas is about people and koalas and how we live with them, how people respond to them, and how we then harness that energy and connection to support greater conservation efforts. So we need to understand a lot about a lot of aspects about koalas. And we created the International Koala Centre for Excellence about 4 years ago, specifically to raise money to support research into these three areas. And Longleat became a partner with the International Koala Centre really early on, because Longleat has always had a very strong interest in conservation and in understanding the biology of the animals that they care for. So they were a natural partner and came on. The Marquis and Marchioness are international patrons of the Koala Centre and have really had an ongoing interest, which also included being involved in recovery efforts after the bushfires, where James and Graeme came down to join us and help out down here. So there's been that tremendous connection. We're in the process of refocusing the International Koala Centre under the banner of Koala Life, still keeping its active focus into research into research into koalas in the landscape, koala health and well-being, and people and koalas. And we are receiving a significant amount of support from Longleat and from the people of the UK, particularly into these research activities.
And Graeme, for you, I know you've been involved and working with someone who's doing some research in the UK, and our koalas have actually been involved as part of that research.
Yeah, and it's where I say where there is death, there is also life. And although we sadly lost a couple of koalas both very early on and recently, it's very sad for us and very sad for the program, but it's been hugely beneficial to some of the research work that is ongoing. So Rachel Tarlington up in Nottingham, who works very closely with a lot of the researchers in both Sydney and Adelaide and some of the big universities out there, she's doing a lot of work on koala retrovirus. So it's not necessarily the oxalate nephrosis that we're focused on with the southern koalas, but what's really interesting is that her baseline has been a lot on northern koalas and their genetics. And for her to be able, in the UK, to get access to some tissue samples and some material from the koalas at Longleat has allowed her to be able to compare the northerns and the southern genetics together to show that although they're very similar in their makeup, they also have sort of very direct disease pathways and the way that disease affects the genome as well. So we're working with that. That all interlinks in with the research work that is being done and supported through Koala Life in Adelaide. We're all working for the same goal. And our little koalas over here, even though there's only a handful of them, might hold a key, might be able to provide some information. The koalas that are kept at Cleveland are being used for research purposes, to ensure that there is a nice, stable, disease-free population as well. At every level, it's great to be able to be involved in it and share it with our guests as well.
Thank you, Graeme. And Chris, I guess touching upon kind of some of the work that's been ongoing over in Australia as well, and some of the fundraising, how is some of the work that you're working on and there's been fundraising for, how is that helping populations and the future out in Australia?
One of the things that was good, if you like, about the bushfire was that there was an opportunity to create a sanctuary of disease-free animals at Cleland. James and Graeme came out after the fires, which devastated Kangaroo Island and parts of South Australia, as well as large areas of habitat in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. So koalas were really struggling. In particular on Kangaroo Island, a very large proportion of the population, about 90%, were killed by the fires, and there were orphans left really struggling. So the South Australian government, in conjunction with Cleland and with the help of Longleat, actually rescued 28 youngsters that had become separated from their mothers, or their mothers had died. They weren't going to survive, and so we're able to bring them to Cleland and establish a sanctuary population, tackle the genetic diseases such as oxalate nephrosis. So we are trying to create a sanctuary population that can be used as a reservoir, if you like, against and a protection against future disasters, and also understand the genetic basis of these diseases, and also be the subject of behavioural experiments, feeding studies, and so forth, whilst growing these animals in a happy and healthy environment. And so we've been able to engage with Longleat over the last 18 months, really, around this project. The rescue component was incredibly valuable. The establishment of the sanctuary was super valuable. And now the understanding behind all of these conditions is really proving to be sort of groundbreaking. Longleat have been incredibly important. They've been really a practical assistance. So having Graeme and James and their expertise out here was enormously valuable. Now they have funded some of the projects. We have 8 research projects going on involving researchers from South Australia, Australia and internationally. And we have this major breeding program up and running to create really robust, healthy koalas, really capable of dealing with all of the challenges that life is throwing at them at the moment, and also be able to respond to climate change challenges and what have you into the future. And this is a really important role for the zoos and for wildlife parks. They're becoming the reservoir of information and the reservoir of important, robust individuals that will be the future of species as we continue, sadly, to devastate the planet.
Thank you, Chris. And yeah, I think we're all witness to kind of some of the work that our team do at Longleat. When guests come walking around our Koala Creek area, the important role in educating our visitors and talking to them about the real life situation, because a lot of it is just awareness. And I think that's an incredible kind of role we play in kind of making sure that happens with the opportunities we have at Longleat. You touched upon the bushfires there, Chris, that have now sadly been a problem for quite a while. And Graeme and James, you've both been out to Australia in early 2020 to kind of see for yourselves and try in some little way to maybe support the team. James, first, do you want to just tell me a bit more about what you experienced out there and what you saw?
Yeah, it's very hard to sum up exactly the scenes that we saw. Obviously, we were there actually as the fires were starting to come more to an end, and obviously had ravaged the surrounding landscapes of Kangaroo Island and even some of the mainland, not far from Cleland Wildlife Park. I think the main thing to touch on is there was a lot of bad. We saw obviously a lot of animals injured, countless koalas coming into Cleland and other places, but also a lot of good. Obviously, the main part of our partnership was to obviously link up with Cleland Wildlife Park, the South Australian government, and people such as Koala Life to really support the southern koala and the ecosystem they live within. And I think that's the biggest thing I take away. There was a lot of bad moments, but the real camaraderie, the support network going from the Cleland team through to the army and so on was phenomenal. And it's a real feel-good feeling, I guess, being part of something so big and on such a large scale. So yeah, very proud to have been part of something as large as that.
And Graeme, a similar question for you, really. What was your experiences and takeaways from your visit when you headed over to the region last year?
I think it's important to remember that fires happen annually in Australia, so they're not an unnatural thing for certain parts of Australia. But the fires that we witnessed last year were much stronger, much larger, move through at such high speeds that the teams on the grounds really struggled in some areas to try and contain them and manage them. They did an incredible job, and I think that's what's, as well as the wildlife and the devastation that happened, as James touched on, that seeing people out there and the response that happened, the firefighters, the volunteers, and then the teams on the floor that were helping rescue koalas, collecting blankets. I mean, our local vet practice put together boxes of medications and knitted goods. We were really privileged to be able to visit Minton Farm and see the work that Bev and the team do down there, but also to see some of the other rescue efforts that were ongoing. I think it's nice to see some of the plant life and the wildlife returning to some of those areas. It's really important to remember that it's not an easy fix. Eucalyptus takes a few years to grow back properly and be edible again for koalas. The populations of some animals have been lost completely in certain areas or have moved out of areas, so that will take time for that to go back. So part of our reason was to support the guys at Cleland and Chris and his team out there, but also to raise awareness. This time last year, James and I were on pretty much every TV channel across the UK talking about bushfires and bringing it real to people in the UK that only just saw it on TV. And yet we're a year on, and the bushfires that have happened this year haven't been put on TV this year. So it's really important that we still keep that alive, and we still let people know that these fires do still decimate areas and people's lives, and it is still important to talk about them and raise funds to support the work that's ongoing out there as well.
So Chris, to finish off this question and answer session, are there any kind of happy, good news stories from the rescues and the rehabilitation over in Australia after the bushfires?
So two amazing things have happened really since the bushfires. The first is that as part of the rescue, we didn't know it at the time, but two of the rescued ladies had babies. They had tiny little joeys that were born in the fires. During the fires, these poor mums stuck up the top of the trees, gave birth. And these youngsters appeared about 3 months later, and we call them the fire babies, Phoenix and Breezy. And they're two incredible survivors of the incredibly disastrous times. And they're doing incredibly well. And the second thing is, of course, the ladies have grown up. We've been starting our breeding program, and we have 6 new youngsters just about to appear that are the next generation, if you like, from the fires. So that's been incredibly exciting for us and really wonderful for our community too, to see these recoveries. About 2% of the continent burnt this time last year. So it was one of the most devastating events to affect the earth really in the last recognisable period. But since then, quite a lot has happened. Yes, there's been a lot of regeneration of some of the forests. The trees have what we call epicormic buds, so they start to produce their little leaves coming out from under the burnt bark. We have found that some of the species survived despite all of these challenges. So I guess the point is that there were the immediate responses that James and Graeme and Longleat were heavily involved in with dealing in injured animals, and now there's the comeback, and that will take 1, 2, 5, 10 years, but many of these species will come back as long as we continue to protect them and to protect the habitat and continue to try to understand all of the dynamics that's going on here. And that's a really important part of the relationship between Cleland and Longleat that will go on for the next decade or more.
That's wonderful news to finish, Chris, and hopefully it's a sign that things are picking up, and I think we're all very confident that the future is in good hands for this amazing kind of species and all the wildlife out in Australia. All right, so I'm going to conclude our question. Oh, yes.
I just wanted to say one really quick thing, and that's from behalf of all of us here at Cleland and in Adelaide and South Australia, to thank the people of the UK, to thank Longleat, to thank all of the wildlife and conservation community there for all of your support. The practical support, the financial support, the emotional support is incredibly appreciated here in South Australia. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And it's really nice to be able to hear that from you guys. And likewise, we're very fortunate and lucky to have you and your team around you and everyone in the South Australian government as partners. And we're thrilled to continue this relationship going forward into the future. So I think for now, I think we're going to say goodbye, and thank you for joining us on a totally different time zone. I think for us it's evening and you very early in the morning. So we're just going to say goodbye to everyone who's listening in now. Thank you.
Bye.